Hello, this is the literary and jury charge portion of the 120 class. We're going to start off with some congressional record, and the topic is the handicapped. Ready? Mr. President, I am submitting a resolution with several of my distinguished colleagues that will hopefully serve to reinforce an awareness of the needs of American citizens who are handicapped. I would like to urge both houses of Congress to concentrate on legislative initiatives that will further assist all disabled Americans in their movement to join the mainstream of society. The time has come to begin to recognize the potential contributions that the 38 million handicapped Americans can make. For too long now, we have emphasized the limitations of disabled individuals rather than giving them a chance to demonstrate their capabilities. During the past decade, we have made great strides in eliminating the barriers which have prevented the handicapped from circulating freely in our society. Ambitious programs which allow the disabled person greater accessibility to public and private buildings and transportation systems have been introduced. Along with the elimination of physical barriers, industry must learn to recognize the abilities of the handicapped. The intent of the resolution is to heighten public awareness of the problems faced by this country's handicapped people. As members of Congress, we can encourage the integration of the handicapped into the mainstream of society by introducing the legislative initiatives that will create employment opportunities for the disabled American. Mr. President, we are at a key point in time. We need to continue to foster a true awareness and a keener understanding of the obstacles that exist in community life for the handicapped individual. I ask for unanimous consent to have this resolution considered to establish a committee to study the problems of the handicapped and the integration into the industrial workforce. Let's make it our resolution to continue to open the doors for all handicapped Americans. Okay. I have an article here. This is called No Hair Day. Ready? If you are turning 16, you stand in front of the mirror, scrutinizing every inch of your face. You agonize that your nose is too big and you're getting another pimple, on top of which you are feeling dumb, your hair isn't blonde, and that boy in your English class has not noticed you yet. Allie never had those problems. 2 years ago, she was a beautiful, popular, and smart 11th grader, not to mention a varsity lacrosse goalie and an ocean lifeguard. With her tall, slender body, pool blue eyes, and thick blonde hair, she looked more like a swimsuit model than a high school student. But during that summer, something changed. After a long day of lifeguarding, Allie couldn't wait to get home, rinse the salt water out of her hair, and comb through the tangles. She flipped her sun-bleached mane forward. "Allie," her mother cried, "what did you do?" She had discovered a bare patch of skin on the top of her daughter's scalp. "Did you shave it? Could someone else have done it when you were sleeping?" Quickly, they solved the mystery. Allie must have wrapped the elastic band too tightly around her ponytail. The incident was soon forgotten. 3 months later, another bald spot was found, then another. Soon, Allie's scalp was dotted with peculiar quarter-sized bare patches. After diagnosis of "it's just stress" to remedies of topical ointments, a specialist began to administer injections of cortisone, 50 in each spot, to be exact, every 2 weeks. To mask her scalp, bloody from the shots, Allie was granted permission to wear a baseball hat to school, normally a violation of the strict uniform code. Little strands of hair would push through the scabs only to fall out 2 weeks later. She was suffering from a condition of hair loss known as alopecia, and nothing would stop it. Allie's sunny spirit and supportive friends kept her going, but there were some low points, like the time when her little sister came into her bedroom with a towel wrapped around her head to have her hair combed. When her mother untwisted the towel, Allie watched the tousled thick hair bounce around her sister's shoulders. Gripping all of her limp hair between 2 fingers, she burst into tears. It was the first time she had cried since the whole experience began. As time went on, a bandana replaced the hat, which could no longer conceal her balding scalp. With only a handful of wispy strands left, the time had come to buy a wig. Instead of trying to resurrect her once long blonde hair, pretending like nothing was ever lost, she opted for an auburn shoulder-length one. Why not? People cut and dye their hair all the time. With her new look, Allie's confidence strengthened. Even when the wig blew off from an open window of her friend's car, they could all share in the humor. As summer approached, Allie began to worry. If she couldn't wear a wig in the water, how could she lifeguard again? Why did you forget how to Why did you forget how to swim? Her father asked. She got the message, and after wearing an uncomfortable bathing cap for only 1 day, she mustered up the courage to go completely bald, despite the stares and occasional comments from less than polite beachcombers. "Why do you crazy kids have your heads shaved?" Allie adjusted to her new look. She arrived back at school that fall. No hair, no eyebrows, no eyelashes, with her wig tucked away somewhere at the back of her closet. As she had always planned, she would run for school president, changing her campaign speech only slightly, presenting a slideshow on famous bald leaders from Gandhi to Mr. Clean. Allie had the students and the facility and faculty rolling in the aisles. In her first speech as the elected president, Allie addressed her condition, quite comfortable, answering questions, dressed in a t-shirt with the words, "Bad Hair Day," printed across the front. She pointed to her shirt and said, "When most of you wake up in the morning and don't like how you look, you may put on this t-shirt." Putting on another t-shirt over the other, she continued, "When I wake up in the morning, I put on this one." It read, "No Hair Day." Everybody cheered and applauded. And Allie, beautiful, popular, and smart, not to mention varsity goalie, ocean lifeguard, and now school president, with the pool blue eyes, smiled back from the podium. Okay. I'm going to be reading from The Search for Causes of Criminal Behavior. Here we go. The neutralization approach of Gresham, Sykes, and David Matska. The neutralization approach centers on rationalizations that allow offenders to shed feelings of guilt and responsibility for their behavior. Sykes and Matza believed that most people drift into and out of criminal behavior, but will not commit a crime unless they have available to them techniques of neutralization. Their study primarily concerned juveniles for whom they suggested neutralization techniques provided only a temporary respite from guilt. That respite, however, lasted long enough to avoid the twinges of conscience while a crime was being committed. Neutralization techniques include the following: denial of responsibility. For example, "I'm a product of my background." Denial of injury. For example, "No one was really hurt." Denial of the victim. Example, "They deserved it." Condemnation of the condemners. Example, "The cops are corrupt." Appeal to higher loyalties. Example, "I did it for my friends." Like containment theory, restraint theories tend to depend on a general agreement as to values, or they assume that offenders are simply conformists who suffer temporary lapses. Neutralization techniques, by definition, are only needed when the delinquent has been socialized into middle-class values or where conscience is well developed. Even so, this technique does not in themselves explain the crime. Such techniques are available to us all if we make only a slight effort to conjure them up. The real question is why some people readily allow pro-offered neutralizations to affect their behavior, while others effortlessly discount them. Then there's the labeling theory. The labeling theory is a social process perspective that sees continued crime as a consequence of the limited opportunities for acceptable behavior that follow from the negative responses of society to those defined as offenders. The labeling theory is the worth of any theory of behavior and is proved by how well it reflects the reality of the social world. In practice, however, theoretical perspectives find acceptance in the academic environment via a number of considerations. Labeling theory, for example, became fashionable in the 1960s. Its popularity may have been due more to the cultural environment into which it was introduced rather than to any inherent quality of the theory itself. Labeling theory was first introduced by Frank Tannenbaum in 1938 under the rubric of tagging. He wrote, "The young delinquent becomes bad because he is defined as bad and because he is not believed that he is good." He went on to say, "The process of making the criminal, therefore, is a process of tagging. It becomes a way of stimulating and evolving the very traits that are complained of. The person becomes the thing he is described as being." Tannenbaum focused on society's power to define an act or an individual as bad and drew attention to the group need for a scapegoat in explaining crime. The search for causes inherent in individuals was not yet exhausted, however, and Tannenbaum's theory fell mostly on deaf ears. By the 1960s, the social and academic environments in America had changed, and the issue of responsibility was seen more in terms of the group than the individual. In his book, Outsiders, published in 1963, Howard Becker pointed out that criminality is not a quality inherent in an act or in a person. Crime, said Becker, results from a social definition through law of unacceptable behavior. That definition arises through moral enterprise, by which groups on both sides of an issue debate and eventually legislate their notion of what is moral and what is not. Becker wrote, "Moral enterprise is the process undertaken by an advocacy group to have its values legitimate or embodied in the law. The central fact about deviance is that it is created by society. Social groups create deviance by making rules whose infraction constitutes deviance. The criminal label, however, produces consequences for labeled individuals that may necessitate continued criminality. In describing the criminal career, Becker wrote, "To be labeled a criminal, one need only commit a single criminal offense, yet the word carries a number of connotations specifying auxiliary traits characteristic of anyone bearing the label. The first time a person commits a crime, the behavior is called primary deviance and may be a merely transitory form of behavior. However, in the popular mind, a known criminal is not to be trusted should not be hired because of the potential for crimes on the job and would not be a good candidate for the military, marriage, or any position requiring responsibility. Society's tendency towards such thinking, Becker suggested, closes legitimate opportunities, ensuring that the only new behavioral alternative available to the labeled criminal are deviant ones. Succeeding episodes of criminal behavior are seen as a form of secondary deviance that eventually becomes stabilized in the behavioral repertoire and self-concept of the labeled person. Labeling theory can be critiqued along a number of dimensions. First, it is not really the theory in that labeling does not uncover the genesis of criminal behavior. It is more useful in describing how such behavior continues than in explaining how it originates. Second, labeling theory does not recognize the possibility that the labeled individual may make successful attempts at reform and may shed the negative label. Finally, the theory does not provide an effective way of dealing with offenders. Should people who commit crimes not be arrested and tried so as to avoid the consequences of negative labels, it would be exceedingly naive to suggest that all repeat criminal behavior would cease, as labeling theory might predict, if people who commit crimes are not officially handled by the system. Okay, and that concludes our literary and jury charge for the 120 class.